Hello and welcome to Race for the White House, our daily show where we get you the latest from the US presidential election. On today's show, we tell you about a good piece of economic news that could benefit the Harris-Walz campaign. Also on the show, we tell you about how Hurricane Helene has evolved into a political storm for both Harris and Trump. With all of this and much more, let's get started. A new political development is bringing major relief for Kamala Harris. A historic strike by dock workers on America's eastern coast has been resolved with just a month to go for the presidential election. This strike marked the first coast-wide action in nearly 50 years, with dock workers demanding fair wages. And this strike affected crucial ports along America's east coast, which handle almost half of the country's foreign trade. When dock workers began their strike this Tuesday, analysts warned of massive negative effects for the global economy. Imports of fresh food, fruits, vegetables, automobiles, furniture, clothes, electronics were all going to be hit badly. Workers threatened that they could cripple America's imports and exports. And that would mean one thing: price increases. Now, this would justifiably spook Kamala Harris and the Biden administration. Inflation has been high over the last 4 years in America after the COVID-19 pandemic. And high prices are one of the main concerns for voters in the upcoming election. It's also why American voters are more likely to trust Donald Trump on the economy over Biden and Harris, who have presided over these higher prices. So this strike by dock workers was terrible news for Harris with just a month to go for the November 5th polls. Now, inflation has actually come down over the last couple of months. But a prolonged strike could have reversed that trend and cost Harris the election. Luckily enough for Harris, the strike has been resolved in just a matter of days. The International Longshoremen's Association and the US Maritime Alliance have reached a tentative agreement. Workers will receive an estimated 60% wage increase over a 6-year contract, and if finalized, the contract could raise the hourly wage for top dock workers substantially. Now, this negotiation was also influenced by public pressure from President Joe Biden. When the deal was announced, President Biden praised the agreement and stated how it represented crucial progress for the economy. And it actually reflects pretty well on Biden. He refused to invoke a law that could have forced dock workers to go back to work. Now, while this tentative agreement addresses key wage issues, it does not resolve all concerns. But at the same time, Kamala Harris will welcome the deal as she tries to convince voters that the economy will be stable under her. Moving on, a massive political storm is brewing, literally and politically. Over the last week, Hurricane Helene has wreaked havoc across the southeastern coast of the United States. This Category 4 hurricane made landfall in Florida, and since then, around 200 people have been killed. Hurricane Helene has caused destruction in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Almost 1 million people are without power, and many don't have proper communication with their families. Now, the Biden-Harris administration is responding to this disaster with a major federal effort. But former President Donald Trump is trying to gain political traction from the situation. Trump falsely claimed that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp couldn't reach President Biden for help. Trump also said that Biden and Harris are being universally given poor grades for the way that they've handled the hurricane, particularly in North Carolina. Trump also attacked them for leaving Americans to drown in North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and elsewhere in the South. But this has sparked a furious backlash from President Biden, who is on the ground in Georgia and Florida visiting disaster-hit families. He's lying, and the governor told him he was lying. Biden told reporters about Trump's accusations. Biden also stressed that his administration is doing everything it can to help those in need. He also promised to stay on the ground as long as necessary. Kamala Harris also interrupted her campaign to fly back to Washington and receive disaster briefing. She also visited Georgia, which has been badly hit by the disaster. Trump has also been contradicted by a number of Republican and Democratic politicians on his claim. South Carolina's Republican Governor Henry McMaster and Tennessee's Republican Governor Bill Lee both noted the fast federal support they've received from the Biden administration. Republican Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin also said that he was grateful to the Federal Disaster Response Agency for its help. Also, North Carolina's Democratic Governor Roy Cooper thanked the Biden administration for their quick actions and communication. As the recovery continues, the political fallout from Hurricane Helene is becoming more evident. While Trump criticizes Biden's handling of the situation, local leaders are recognizing federal help. But it remains to be seen how the American voters rate the administration's handling of the crisis. Moving on, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney and Kamala Harris appeared together at a rally in Wisconsin. Cheney, who is a prominent critic of Donald Trump, said that she is proudly voting for Vice President Kamala Harris in Wisconsin. Cheney has never voted for a Democrat before, and cited the events of the January 6th riots in 2021 as a reason for her endorsement.
I know that the most conservative of conservative values is fidelity to our Constitution. I tell you, I have never voted for a Democrat, but this year I am proudly casting my vote for Vice President Kamala Harris.
Cheney shot to national prominence for investigating Trump for his role in instigating the January 6th riots. Also, she is well known for being the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney. This event took place in Ripon, Wisconsin, which was incidentally where the Republican Party was founded back in the 1850s. Cheney declared that anyone who tried to undermine democracy could never be trusted with power again. She also criticized former President Donald Trump for his role in the January 6th riots. While she was once a prominent critic of Kamala Harris's policy agenda, she has now changed her position. She has also supported Harris in other battleground states like North Carolina. During the event, Harris directly addressed Republican and independent voters and encouraged them to join in standing up for democracy. Now, the purpose of this event was for Harris to reach out to these voters whom she needs in crucial swing states. In Wisconsin especially, over 20 former Republican politicians have come out to endorse Harris over Trump. Many other Republicans nationally have also endorsed Harris. This includes former Vice President Dick Cheney, former Representative Adam Kinzinger, and former Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. However, it's unclear whether Harris will be able to leverage these endorsements for greater numbers. While Cheney stood with Harris, Trump criticized her strongly. He called Cheney terrible and a stupid war hawk, among other choice words. He also claimed that she and Harris were bad for their respective parties. The ultimate success of Harris's strategy of courting Republican voters will have to be seen at the ballot box on November 5th. Joining us now is our White House correspondent Rohit Sharma. Rohit, can you tell us a little bit about what the Harris campaign is doing to woo Republican voters to their side?
Look, you have to go back and see what had happened in the presidential primaries, the Republican presidential primaries. There were a lot of voters that had wanted to vote and actually ended up voting for Nikki Haley. And there were a substantial amount of delegates that she was able to pick. Now, again, not enough to win the nomination, but enough to swing the election one way or the other. I think that's the strategy for Kamala Harris to be able to reach out to these voters. It's not the first time we've seen, that she is campaigning with Republican leaders. We saw Republican leaders come at the DNC and speak at the DNC and talk about their experiences working with President Donald Trump. There is a group, the group of voters that was associated with Nikki Haley, and they wanted Nikki Haley to be the nominee. And then we've seen over the past couple of months that they've been able to form a group that's Nikki Haley voters for Kamala Harris. So I think the ploy here is to swing enough voters in the key swing states and try to reach out to these voters who do not want to vote for President Trump, may not want to also vote for Kamala Harris, but then give them an option. And campaigning with figures like Liz Cheney, who stood on their principle. Again, Liz Cheney, somebody who was on the Jan 6th committee to impeach President Donald Trump. So I think it all plays into appealing to those voters and try to see if she can make a dent. Make a dent with some of those voters who are still not happy with Donald Trump.
Right, thanks for that, Rohit. And could you tell us where exactly is this strategy going to be focused on? Are there any specific states where Harris particularly hopes to succeed with this strategy?
Well, as I said, it's trying to get those 10,000, 12,000 voters in the swing states. We are looking at a very, very close election. One county could flip the state. And it so happens actually that in Virginia there are only 3 counties that make the entire state a Democratic state. So it's focused on, and we'll see. It's focused on making sure that these Republicans feature in ads. They give interviews as surrogates. They do campaign with Vice President Harris and other surrogates in the swing states leading up to the election, which is only 30 some days to go. And look, it all comes down to leaving no stone unturned for Kamala Harris. She only had 100 days to run the campaign, and I think it's also partly shows the fact that Democrats are learning a lesson from the mistakes they did in 2016. The last few days, actually a few weeks, Hillary Clinton did not go to Wisconsin and Michigan, and she ended up losing those. So I think they're trying to make all these states in play, and the way to do it is to campaign hard and campaign, with anybody and everybody who would be willing to support Kamala Harris.
And finally, Rohit, if I could ask you, do you think Harris's strategy could work?
Well, look, it could actually very well work. I mean, there's only one way to find out, which is, if she starts seeing a bump in her poll numbers, there are disgruntled Republican voters who could be swayed. And I'm pretty sure the campaign has done their own research to understand that, there are voters that could be convinced to vote for Kamala Harris. But it's not the first time we're trying to see this. I mean, there's always, the pitch to reach out to the other side. But as America has polarized, I think, we see probably lesser of these efforts. But for Kamala Harris to do this now, I think it makes more sense. Closer to the election, a lot of people are paying attention to what's going on, to be seen with Republicans, to make the connect with Republican voters and trying to reach out to them and say, look, I'm going to be president for both Republicans and Democrats, and you are Americans at the end of the day. We saw what's going on with President Trump, and, we saw what Jack Smith's new update to the court case is. So there is a chance, but again, there's only one way to find out, which would be either polling or the results, which we'll all see on November 5th.
Thanks so much, Rohit. Moving on, we have our segment Poll Watch, where we talk numbers. With just over a month to go for the US presidential election, the race for the White House is becoming quite intense. Vice President Kamala Harris continues to maintain her narrow lead nationally, and it remains a neck-to-neck battle in swing states between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So let's look at today's polls to see where the two presidential contenders are. According to the New York Times Siena poll, Harris is leading in the national polls with a 49% approval rating, while Trump is behind at 46%. In the swing state of Michigan, Harris maintains a lead at 49% of public support to Trump's 47%. In the states of Pennsylvania and Nevada, Harris has 49% of support to Trump's 48%. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, Harris has a 50 to 48% advantage over Trump. Meanwhile, in the state of Arizona, Trump has a 49-47 lead over Harris. And in the states of Georgia and North Carolina, Trump has a 49-48 lead over Harris. With just a month to go for the election on November 5th, it remains to be seen how these polls will evolve over this last month of October. And now for some stories from the 2024 US election that you might have missed. In a major show of support, music legend Bruce Springsteen has endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz. Springsteen called this decision one of the most consequential in US history. He praised Harris and Walz for their commitment to an inclusive vision of America. Springsteen, who is a noted Democratic donor, has previously criticized Donald Trump. He emphasized the urgent need for unity and encouraged Americans to rediscover their shared values that can bring them together. Moving on, former President Donald Trump announced his plans to deport Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, if he wins the election in November. His comments follow a controversial statement that he made during last month's presidential debate, where he claimed that Haitian migrants were stealing and eating pets. Now, this assertion was dismissed as garbage by Ohio's Republican governor, but Trump made clear that he would revoke the temporary protected status that Haitian migrants enjoy that allows them to stay in the United States due to unsafe conditions in their home countries. His remarks echo false claims already repeated by his allies, including Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance. And finally, Vice Presidential candidate Tim Walz addressed a Democratic Muslim voter group on Thursday night about the war in Gaza. During the event, he expressed understanding of the community's pain, saying, "I know the pain of this community is deep. Our hearts are broken." He called for an immediate end to the ongoing war in Gaza. Now, Walz has emphasized that a Harris-Walz administration would actively combat Islamophobia and also ensure that Muslims were engaged in key leadership roles. Now, despite their support for Democrats in the past, many Muslim and Arab voters feel uncertain about supporting Harris due to Biden's policies on Israel. Low turnout from this demographic could impact key battleground states, particularly in Michigan. And that's all we have for you on this week of Race for the White House. Thank you so much for watching us here on India Today Global.